During World War II, there were many men and women who were accused of treason. The Nazis executed thousands of people for this crime, and many of those were people who refused to fight for the Germans, meaning they were betraying the Reich. But for centuries, treason was a serious offence people would pay for their lives with, and during the reign of King Henry VIII, one man was even boiled alive after being found guilty of treason. The Second World War saw people executed on gallows, and also at the firing ranges, if they were condemned for treason. But there was a Canadian-Japanese man, who during the Second World War was executed for treason, and he was one of only 2 Canadians in history to have ever faced prosecution for war crimes. But as he made his way to the gallows, Kanao Inouye shouted Banzai, showing his true allegiance to the Japanese army. Join us today to look at the execution of the Japanese-Canadian traitor, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Kanao Inouye was born on the 24th of May 1916 in Kamloops, British Columbia in Canada. He was a second-generation Japanese-Canadian, as his father had emigrated to Canada from Tokyo. His father served in the Canadian Army during the First World War and was distinguished. His father had served with the 131st Battalion of the New Westminster Regiment and had been awarded the Military Medal. He gained his citizenship in 1920, 4 years after his son was born. Kanao described his childhood in Canada as idyllic and peaceful, and he said he enjoyed his schooling and also got on rather well with most of his schoolmates. Some considered him a teacher's pet, but following his graduation from Vancouver Technical High School, his family pressured him to travel to Japan to study at a higher level. His father died in 1929, but despite this the family had many connections in Japanese industry. His grandfather was the president of the Keio Electric Tramways and was a member of the Japanese Parliament and House of Peers. It was hoped that Kanao, with his grasp of English and Japanese customs and way of life, would make a perfect man in trade deals for the company between America and Asia. But he struggled to shift from the Canadian to Japanese culture, and when he travelled to Japan, he was treated with suspicion. They did not appreciate his heritage, and he found it difficult to engage in conversations with Japanese locals. He longed to return to Canada and said, "We used to go together with others, and they always came around and asked us what we fellows were doing in Japan, because we were not wanted there." During one incident he was even arrested and was questioned and was subjected to water torture by the Japanese. He was tied up and restrained, and water was forced down his throat until his stomach became distended, and a wet towel was kept over his face to simulate drowning. This torture went on for a while, and Inouye even went to a sanatorium to recover following this. However, as the Second World War waged on, in Japan, Inouye would be conscripted into the war effort. He was seen as an ideal person to become a civilian interpreter, and he was sent to prisoner of war camps in Hong Kong to speak with British and other Allied prisoners. However, he was now in the company of Canadians, but he was in charge. One former prisoner would state, Inouye went out of his way to be offensive to Canadian prisoners. He continually directed very foul and abusive language at them. He was nicknamed the Slap Happy, or the Kamloops Kid, and he went out of his way to taunt prisoners and ranted at them. He screamed that the rising sun flag would fly one day high over Ottawa, and that the sisters of the prisoners would be assaulted by victorious Japanese forces. He had gone completely power mad, and he had turned himself over to the Japanese war effort, despite his harsh punishment. Many prisoners began to fear him, and he would sometimes appear at the door of a hut and whisper, "Where is Slap Happy?" If soldiers responded, he would take them out of the barrack and then beat them severely. There were accusations levelled against him which were linked to war crimes. A first charge in his war crimes trial arose from a beating Inouye had given to 2 Canadian officers on the 21st of December 1942. Whilst on the assembly parade that morning, the 2 men were missing, and the commandant then accused 2 officers named Atkinson and Norris of helping 2 men escape. The commandant ordered Inouye to slap the officers, and he did this, beating them so hard that they collapsed. When they were on the ground, he then battered them, kicking them, and Atkinson was brutalised so badly that he almost lost an eye. Inouye days later tried to apologise, saying he lost his temper, but Norris refused to accept this. He had been assigned to the Sham Shui Po prison camp, but then was discharged from the army in 1943. However, in 1944, he was then conscripted to work as an interpreter for the Kempeitai Tai military police in Hong Kong, who were notorious in their brutality. The work of the military police was mostly murder, and they routinely tortured people until they were dead. There were some survivors who told of Inouye's brutality there. One witness said, "He was a chief torturer of my mind and body." Inouye used the water torture method upon this man, and one witness was a 55-year-old British woman named Mary Power. She was implicated in spying and was tortured using water by Inouye. For half an hour she almost drowned, and she was then hanged from a hook, with her feet barely touching the ground. Inouye then lit a cigarette and burned her face, cheeks and hand, until she fainted from the pain. Following the defeat of the Japanese during the Second World War, Kanao Inouye was arrested in Kowloon, and he was then tried for war crimes. One court official said he had committed acts of wanton and barbarous cruelty, that it was mere accident or fate, whether these victims survived or not. However, there was an issue with his conviction of war crimes. It was said that as he was found guilty of torturing prisoners and civilians, it was on appeal that he could not be prosecuted for war crimes committed by an enemy army because he was a Canadian citizen. This meant that the death sentence handed out to him was revoked initially, but the courts would not stop to punish him. Instead of war crimes, he was then in April 1947 indicted on charges of high treason. It was said during his trial that he could change his story like a chameleon, and he claimed he was just a soldier doing his duty. He said he felt embittered against the Canadian people, but that he had eagerly joined the Japanese army and had served in the China campaign. He claimed he felt proud to serve in the Kempeitai and enjoyed brutalising spies to help the Japanese war effort. More evidence of his brutality came to light, but his lawyer tried to prove that as he had no allegiance to the British Crown, they could therefore not be guilty of treason. At one point during the proceedings he said, "My body is the Emperor's, long live the Emperor." Despite these questions, it took 10 minutes to find Inouye guilty. The judge donned the black cap and then proclaimed that he would be sentenced to death. There was another appeal lodged, but this was not successful, and his execution was then planned. He was held inside of Hong Kong's Stanley prison to await his execution. Inside of the prison was an execution chamber complete with a gallows, and it was this that claimed the life of Kanao Inouye. He was led up the stairs of the gallows, accompanied by a number of guards, and as he reached the top, he came face to face with an executioner. The executioner placed a cap over his head and the noose, and during this part Inouye shouted his final words, the Japanese war cry of Banzai, showing his true allegiance. Shortly after this, the trapdoor was opened, and he fell through and was executed. Kanao Inouye's story is one which was unique up until 2010, as he was the only Canadian man at that point in history to have faced prosecution for war crimes. But he was instead executed for treason, as he was deemed to have inflicted such suffering against his own citizens. He was a man who at the age of 31 went to the gallows for being a brutal prison guard during World War II. His final words being Banzai showed his true colours and where he had nailed his support to during the Second World War. But today he's considered a forgotten, evil executed guard of the Second World War. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. And once again, thank you so much for watching.